And welcome on in to the Third Round Reversal Fantasy Football Podcast. Brett Malamud with you, along with Zach Malamud. Zach, what's going on?
Not much. Home from college, Brett, and having a blast. I'm excited for some football this weekend.
Excited for football. I did not practice today, and I am a questionable tag for this weekend. But I am getting by with a little help from my friends, if you get my drift here. Little Beatles reference. Please subscribe to us on YouTube, wherever you get your podcast. Give us the thumbs up. Make sure you get your comments in. We are live, and so we will answer as many questions as we can. Zach, we head into the semifinals of the fantasy football playoffs in most leagues, the finals in other leagues, and then the final some leagues, depending on your setup. But for the bulk of leagues here, it's the semifinals. You and I actually have a matchup against each other, and I had a bye week last week, and now coming to a matchup here where it seems like our teams are pretty stacked.
I was gonna say it should be a really, really good matchup. I think like very high scoring, a lot of really good players that we both have. Should be a good one.
Yeah, definitely looking forward to it. Let's jump into some of the news here from the last week, though. We start out with CJ Stroud, who is likely out with the concussion heading into this weekend. Zach, I mean, he was out last week, probably going to be out this week. I think this is more the case of them really not wanting to rush their franchise quarterback out there, a guy who could be there for the next 10 years, just putting him out there for, basically no reason here.
Yeah, I mean, they're still kind of fighting for maybe a spot. So, like, it is interesting. But what I would say is I feel like last week's win at Tennessee just gave them a ton of confidence. You grab a win on the road in a division game against a rival with a backup quarterback in. I mean, that's going to give you confidence even without your young star in the lineup. So it kind of proved that Houston's defense is a unit to be reckoned with. And then looking at the offense, like they looked okay. I still don't think there's really much in that offense. Maybe we'll talk about Singletary later, but like that's probably about it in this offense. If Stroud is out, that's basically the question mark right now for me, Brett.
Yeah, and it was Case Keenum actually who got the start there, and it wasn't pretty by any means. 23 of 36, 229 yards, threw a touchdown, also threw a pick. It was efficient, and the team could be efficient, even missing their best receiver, even missing their second best receiver, Tank Dell and Nico Collins. And so it was sort of the Noah Brown show. 11 targets there and 8 catches, 82 yards, scored a touchdown. Like, listen, it can be effective. And we Devin Singletary, obviously, like he had a bulk of the carries, and he's proven to be an effective back when he was in his time in Buffalo. I think that's something that can continue here. So life goes on without Stroud. Right now, they're currently in the 8th spot in the playoff hunt, tied with Cincinnati, tied with Indianapolis, and tied with Buffalo. So yeah, it should be pretty interesting as we approach the end of the season here. And they really want to take their time here with a franchise quarterback.
Yeah, definitely, Brendan. It's a tough matchup against a really tough Cleveland defense that probably would likely go after Stroud and maybe put him in a lot of danger.
Yeah, certainly. We'll obviously break down that matchup in just a little bit. Let's jump into our next story here, and it is Isaiah Pacheco. He is expected to play on the shoulder. It was kind of interesting because when you hear the word surgery come out, a very scary term, but it seemed like this procedure that he had was going to keep him right back in. We haven't heard from Andy Reid yet about Pacheco, just that he expects him to play, barring a setback, and he was medically cleared and all of that. But they basically took the cautious approach last week by not rushing him out there. And so, listen, they have a bulk of running backs in Jerick McKinnon and Clyde Edwards-Helaire, who were able to carry the load. And we'll talk about Clyde when we get to the Chiefs matchup. But I mean, this is big news just for fantasy owners who have Pacheco.
Yeah, I'm one of them, Brett. I'm very happy that he is going to be able to come back for this matchup. I would also say the good thing is about this matchup, it's on Monday, so it kind of gives him an extra day rather than a Sunday 1:00 game. He gets a Monday 1:00 game on Christmas Day, so that's huge right now. I think the other thing that's huge is the matchup here because I don't know just yet. I mean, maybe we'll hear more from Andy Reid, but I don't know if he's at 100% yet and they're going to give him a full workload. That's a big question mark because once you say expected to play, that can mean a ton of different things. He can play in a limited role, he can play his full role. What I will say is the matchup stands out to me because even in a limited role, I feel like you have to put Pacheco in your lineup because of the matchup. It's a good one against Vegas. Like they're not great against the run so far this season, and Pacheco can really take advantage of that. He had a great game against them the last time they played earlier this season. So when it comes to that, the matchup stands out to me, and it tells me, yeah, you got to put him in your lineup if you have Pacheco. And, of course, he's expected to play as per Andy Reid.
Yeah, I think it's just a major deal. Just that, like you said, the matchup is really good. Obviously, we'll talk about the Max Crosby rivalry here with Patrick Mahomes and what that actually looks like. But as far as the run goes, Las Vegas hasn't been that great against the run. They've been pretty good at rushing pass, but at the same time, it's a really juicy matchup here. I think that Pacheco will end up having a big day, so he's a must start here.
Definitely.
All right, so jumping into our last story here, Keaton Mitchell, he heads to the IR list, and Zach, you're a dynasty owner of Keaton Mitchell, so we'll break down the dynasty aspect of it. Obviously, like this was not what you wanted to see. I don't recommend anybody who hasn't seen the injury to go try to find it. It was a pretty ugly looking injury, and all the best to Keaton Mitchell in his recovery. Which, listen, he tore his ACL. It'll take quite a while. I'll probably miss a little bit of next year, if not most of next year, depending on how quickly his recovery goes. But I mean, we have to talk how we have to move on, just from the sense of fantasy football. From the dynasty standpoint here, Keaton Mitchell, like it's a big loss for a young piece here. What do you see just as a dynasty owner here?
So, I mean, Brett, I'm going to hold on to him. I think even though, yeah, this injury was ugly. Like it really was a bad looking injury. The thing I'll say, though, is like he's young. He had a great year so far. So, like, I think the biggest thing on that is you got to hold on to him. Like, I think you hold on to him. You put him on his IR spot or just hold on to him in Dynasty. Like, very young, still 21 years old. Still has a lot of time in the NFL. I think from the standpoint of you're looking at the Ravens, that's when you come into question of who's going to end up taking his spot. But from Dynasty, Brett, I'm holding on to him right now. I definitely would just stash him on my bench because he looked electric. The Ravens really like him. And like I said, he's 21 years old, still has a lot of time once he gets healthy.
That as far as this week goes, we're back on the Gus bus. I think that Gus Edwards here obviously is going to get the bulk of the work here. I think it's high floor, probably a lower ceiling, though. They are playing against San Francisco, so it is not that great of a matchup. Probably a touchdown dependent option here, but a high floor.
I was gonna say, I think it's Gus Edwards. We're right on the Gus bus. Like he's the guy in this running back room now. Justice Hill, yeah, he'll get his opportunities, but fantasy relevancy, I think it goes to Gus Edwards here. However, like you said, Brett, like I'm staying away this week. Probably, I think this is one of the toughest matchups you can get against the San Fran front. I'd stay away from Gus Edwards and anybody in that Baltimore backfield this week.
Yeah, it's one of those flex options for me because, we always talk high floor, and sort of the safe play. It's not that safe of a matchup. It just is not. San Francisco defense has been fantastic this year. And so, yeah, I don't disagree with you. I just think that it's, again, he's going to get the bulk of the work. So if you are in a bind and you are a little bit nervous about starting them and you really don't have anybody else, it's not a bad thing by starting Gus Edwards this week. I just wouldn't expect a 40-point week. But, could finish with double digits just based on the volume alone.
I agree.
So let's jump into our standouts of the week. Zach, we got to start out with your guy here, Sam Laporta. The man has 5 catches for 56 yards, 3 touchdowns on the day. Zach, just break down your guy here.
Just an unbelievable week from Sam Laporta, Brett. He was just absolutely tremendous. Jared Goff was looking for him a lot, which was huge. I mean, it was only 6 targets, but he was looking for him in the red zone, which was very big for Sam Laporta. Gets 3 touchdowns in the end on 5 receptions, 56 yards. So really, really good. It's just a good sign that he's looking for him in the red zone. So a great week for Sam Laporta. He is a lineup lock. 100%. Put him in your lineup. He got you probably to the semifinal. Hopefully, it can get you to the championship.
So, Laporta right now, it's pretty interesting because, we could talk Trey McBride a little bit too. I think the 2 of them, at least, are now the 1-2. If we were doing a dynasty startup tomorrow, I think that Sam Laporta and Trey McBride might be the 1-2 punch here, just based on what we've seen from a guy like a Travis Kelce, the struggles that we've seen this year. The age obviously is a bit concerning. I'd probably throw Hockenson in there also as an option, but I think that this is kind of cool just watching the rookies come about. Well, so Laporta's a rookie, Trey McBride's a second-year player, but at least these young guys just coming about and taking the league by storm. It's pretty awesome to see.
Yeah, I agree, and I have a tough decision. I do have both Laporta and McBride on one of my teams, so I might end up starting both of them. It should be interesting. They both have pretty solid matchups this week.
Yeah, and again, like I just mentioned on the last part of our show here, high floors is really what you want. Both of these guys have high floors, and because of that, I think that they're both viable options this week. Just because I think the volume that they're getting is insane. Laporta, listen, he only had 5 catches. Didn't matter. 3 of them were for touchdown. I think that sort of play here continues.
Yeah, I agree.
All right, so jumping into, let's get to our question right here. George Play says Taysom Hill or Dallas Goedert this week. Zach, you want to jump in quickly?
I'm going to say Dallas Goedert here. I think, of course, you look at the matchup, and yeah, it's a little bit tougher against the Giants, but it's Dallas Goedert. Like, he'll get his touches. I think the floor is a lot safer with Dallas Goedert. We talk about having that safe floor, especially in the playoffs now. Like, it's the playoffs. Yeah, you could be looking for upside in Taysom Hill, but I do think the Rams are going to end up being the better team tonight. I think they are just the better team overall. Maybe that affects how the Saints end up play calling and switching around their play calling. But I think it's Dallas Goedert for this week especially.
It took right out of my mouth. The high floor, and that's what I'm pointing to right now. I am a Goddard owner in Dynasty, actually. I'm actually going to be benching him, though, this weekend, I think, for Trey McBride, which is a pretty interesting decision that I don't think I would have made just a month ago. But I just think that the floor is very high on Goddard. He has been sort of working his way back from injury, and so he seems to be getting closer to 100%. And so, yeah, I would take him over a guy like Taysom Hill just because I think the floor is 0, plain and simple, on Taysom Hill. The floor is 0.
Yeah, definitely.
All right, so jumping into our next standout here, it is James Cook. And Zach, this is a guy that we talked about, quite a bit early in the season, and the struggles and, looking at Josh Allen in the red zone and all of that kind of outlook here. Didn't matter this week. It seemed like they really tried to get James Cook involved. 25 carries, 179 yards and a touchdown. Has 2 catches for 42 yards, a touchdown as well. Finishes with a sweet 36.1 standard PPR points. I think this guy, plain and simple, is a set it and forget it guy here going forward for the next couple weeks.
Yeah, Brett. I mean, he's locked into lineups now. He's locked in. They literally in this game focused the entire game plan around James Cook. They gave it to James Cook. Give James Cook the ball, whether it's out of the backfield or just running. I mean, like receiving, like whatever it was, give James Cook the ball. And he had a monster week. I think they'll end up doing something similar to that. They're playing a Chargers team that's not that good on defense. They've struggled mightily to figure everything out on the defensive side. I think Buffalo goes on an offensive rampage this week, and James Cook will be probably the middle part of that. He's going to be a perfect option for fantasy. Keep putting him in your lineup.
Yeah, and again, this is another guy that I'm starting in my dynasty lineup this weekend, and I'm excited about it because it seems to be like towards the beginning of the season, we saw the fumble. He got pulled from the game against the Jets, and really saw the light of day until the end of the third quarter. And it was like, oh no, here we go. This is going to be one of these seasons. They fired the offensive coordinator, and basically it was like, okay, get James Cook the ball. How do we do that? Seems like they're figuring out ways to get him the ball, and I don't care that he doesn't have the red zone carries. It really doesn't matter to me. They put Lat Murray in. It's all good. I think James Cook has that ability, has the ability to score from, outside the 20. And that's what has been making him really effective down the stretch here. I think that he's a set and forget it guy down the stretch.
Yeah, definitely agree with you, Brett.
All right, and let's jump to our viewer question here. Kupp or Breece Hall? Adrian has the question. Zach, you want to jump on that one?
See, this one's tough, Brett, because obviously these two guys are absolute monsters. Kupp has the worst matchup. He's going up against New Orleans tonight, and New Orleans has not allowed wide receivers really at all this season to end up going off against them. So I feel like the upside definitely favors Hall. He has a matchup against, I believe it's Washington, Brett. So like that's a solid matchup for him. I think looking at that, the upside I might take, especially in the playoffs now. I know it's hard to bench a guy like Cooper Kupp, but I feel like the upside's not there because of how good the Saints secondary has been this year. And I think it's going to be a tough night for Cooper Kupp.
Yeah, I agree. I think that we've been talking about New Orleans quite a bit here. In terms of like that's one of those tough matchups. And yeah, listen, when we talk Jets and that defense, it's great. However, they're playing against the Commanders, and so I think they're going to have the ball. I think that they're going to be leading in this game. I think that it's also one of those games where the Commanders are not that they're trying to lose, because you don't see that in the NFL. But I just think that they're so weak that they will lose. They're in a draft spot. Their fans are rooting against them. I don't know that they're going to be like, hey, Breece Hall, go this way, follow the signs, and get to the end zone. But I also know that they have not been effective against the run, or they really haven't been effective against very much this season. I'm taking Breece Hall because I think that there's that potential that he goes off in this game.
That's fair, Brett. Yeah, I definitely agree with you on that. I just think it's going to be a tough matchup for Kupp tonight.
All right, so jumping into our next question here from J-Rod, Javonte Williams or Nuke Hopkins, no PPR.
See, this is an interesting because obviously you take out PPR and it kind of changes things a little bit. I would probably end up taking Javonte Williams, Brett, without PPR. In a PPR, I'd probably favor Hopkins. In this matchup, like Hopkins has a better matchup. He's going up against Seattle. Javonte's going up against New England. The thing I'll say, though, is the floor is probably better, no PPR for Javonte. And I think Javonte will get his touches, of course. That's kind of how this Denver offense has been working. They give Javonte his touches and they work things through the run game. kind of opens things up for Russell Wilson in the passing game. I would favor Javonte. It's a close one, but I think because of the touches, I'll feel more secure with Javonte in my lineup.
This is going to be the one where we are split because I'm taking Nuke. I think that the touchdown ability, listen, they're playing against Seattle. I think it's a tough matchup just from the team standpoint. So I think they're going to be down in this game. I think they're going to be throwing. We'll get to them in a bit. I think a guy like a Tajay Spears, where they've been utilizing him when they're trailing, he could be he could have a big day because I think they're going to have to throw the ball. And just from the touchdown ability, I think it's going to end up being Nuke over Javonte. Listen, it's a close matchup, and you can't go wrong with either guy. But I think that both sides are a higher floor. But I think as far as the higher ceiling goes, it goes to Nuke because I think that there'll be one of those nukes where he scores on a big bomb here. We've seen that quite a bit against Seattle.
Yeah, definitely fair. If he gets into the end zone, then it's a great day for him.
All right, so now let's break down our last standout here of the week. It is Jordan Addison. Zach, I mean, another guy we've been breaking down here quite a bit. Another guy I own in Dynasty, which is another great thing here. 6 catches, 111 yards. He had 2 touchdowns on the day. And listen, it came at the expense of Justin Jefferson coming in, getting hurt, leaving. He should be okay to play again this week. So, we'll monitor all that. But if you have Justin Jefferson, you're probably playing him. Listen, Jordan Addison, though, I think what this has proven is as far as the rookie receivers go, he has absolutely torched the other 3 that got picked in the first round with him, just in terms of fantasy points. I think that big play ability is there. However, now he's playing in a divisional matchup against Detroit. It's a bit of a tougher one, and so it's probably a flex option for me here. Our league plays 3 wide receivers, so he'll probably be out there for me. But yeah, I think he's a flex option wide receiver 3 here.
Yeah, I mean, Brett, what this game kind of proved to me was even with Justin Jefferson, like Jordan Addison will get his targets, he'll get his touches, he'll score touchdowns. Like that's the biggest thing for me. So I think Jordan Addison, you said it, he's a flex play right now because Jefferson's probably going to play. He's probably going to be in a lot of people's lineups. I think I would say Addison is a flex play though, because he's going to get those targets. This is a matchup against Detroit. Although they looked really, really good last week, this is a secondary that you can take advantage of. You really can. There's been a lot of teams in the past that have been able to get behind this defense. They're at home also in Minnesota. I think they're going to want to get those receivers the ball. They obviously have Ty Chandler. They're going to be relying on him through the run game. I do think Jordan Addison's in for another solid game. I'd have him as a flex play just like you.
All right, so we got another viewer question here from Jay. These are the questions that I love here. Cleveland or the Eagles defense? Eagles going obviously against the Giants, and Cleveland, who do they play this weekend? They're playing at Houston. At Houston without Stroud, most likely. So Zach, who are you taking here?
So the biggest thing for me is, I mean, I have the Philly defense. I picked them up in one of my leagues. I'm going with Philly. I think it's one of those streaming options that you just kind of fall in love with. You're like, oh my goodness, they're playing the Giants. The Giants are like the 32nd ranked offense. I'm going with the Eagles defense here. I know Cleveland has been really, really good, and you probably relied on them for a lot of weeks. This Houston team, like, I think they proved last week that even with Case Keenum at quarterback, they're still a solid team. Like, they're still going to get yards up on the board. They're still going to move the ball downfield. They have a really good offense. I think the Eagles at home, they have a point to prove against this Giants team. I think watch out for the Giants. Like, the doors might be blown off in this game. I think the Eagles have a point to prove, like I said, and they'll end up winning this one easily. I'll go with the Eagles defense.
Yeah, I think we've seen this bit of a fire out of the Eagles, and obviously last week was Not a great week for them. Obviously, take the loss in Seattle, national television, like wasn't great. I think I agree with you. I think this is going to be one of those games where you see this huge blowout. There's a lot of like press this week about Tommy DeVito, and we saw what happened to him last week when he played against a good defense and loved celebrating with his celebration. Yeah, this is going to be a lot of sacks, I think, in this one. I'm taking Eagles just because I think that this is one of those where you kind of have to be searching for pick sixes, and I think that there's the possibility that we get this one.
Yeah, I just quickly, Brett, the biggest thing is you mentioned it, what we saw last week. They went up against New Orleans and they got absolutely trucked. I mean, yes, DeVito's been really, really good over the last couple of weeks, and they got him going and they got some wins up on the board, but then they went up against a good defense and they were trounced. So on the road, it's just too tough of a matchup, and I'll take the Eagles defense any day.
Another one here from Jay. Monty Waddle, Aaron Jones, flex 1.
Oh, this is a tough one. I'll probably take Aaron Jones out of it right now. Even though he's going up against Carolina, I'm still iffy on it. I would probably prefer the other two just looking at it. I think Monty has a little bit of a tougher one that he has to go up against in Minnesota. It's a tough one because Waddle's, of course, going up against Dallas. The thing I'll say about Waddle is it all kind of depends on Tyreek. If Tyreek's in, then you probably lean maybe to a guy like Aaron Jones. If Tyreek's out, then Waddle, you saw him have a field day, even against the tough defense in the Jets. I'm going to say in the end, I'm going to say Waddle, Brett. I'm a big believer that he'll get things going once again, even though Dallas is a tough defense. They got trounced last week. I'm going with Waddle down in Miami.
I agree, actually. I think that, listen, Tyreek actually came back to practice last week and earlier today. And so, good news on that front. So I think he'll be in there when it's all said and done. As far as it goes here with Montgomery, I'm a Monty owner. I got to say, I was a little bit nervous heading into this week just based on last week's put. Very, very high floor, like extremely high, probably the highest floor in the league right now. But the home run ability just hasn't been there the last couple of weeks. And the reason is because of Jahmyr Gibbs. Obviously tough matchup now. He plays Minnesota and Dallas to end his season, which is why I'm pretty nervous about playing him. I'm going to take Waddle in this one. But it's close. It is close. I just think that Waddle has that whole offense is clicking right now. I don't know that Tyreek is going to be full go based off their playoff position right now. I think that they'll sort of take their time here, and it could mean, they'll throw some up to Waddle. When they played last week, it was, they were drawing up plays to throw up to Waddle. I think that sort of thing continues here. Build that guy's, and then you essentially have 2 number 1 receivers going when it comes playoff time.
Yeah, definitely fair, Brett.
All right, so let's jump to our game previews. We start with tonight's matchup, New Orleans at the Los Angeles Rams. Zach, let's first start out the Rams because, we talk about them pretty much every single week as far as Puka Nacua versus Cooper Kupp, Kyren Williams and what the volume can be. Last week, the volume was insane for Kyren Williams. 27 carries, 152 yards, and a touchdown. He's just kind of being the set it and forget it guy as per normal.
Yeah, he definitely is. Like, put him in your lineup. He's probably got you pretty far so far. I mean, if you're in a semifinal, you're probably thinking Kyren Williams as well because he had a monster game this past week. So he's a set it and forget it. I said I was a little bit iffy on Kupp. I'm a little bit iffy just on the receivers in general. Kupp and Nacua, I would still be starting them, definitely, but I feel like expectations just have to be a little bit lower based on how good this New Orleans defense has been against wide receivers. They haven't, like I said before, they have not let a wide receiver really go off against them. So they figured that out this season. Their secondary has been really, really good. So I would temper expectations just a little bit. I think, Brett, this is going to end up, people are like wanting a shootout from this game. I think it's going to be low scoring. I think they're going to battle it out on the defensive side. Although the Rams defense is very young and they haven't really figured things out just yet, I think they figure things out against Derek Carr, who, let's just say, has not been great so far this season. Like, they've had a lot of problems in that offense. I think it's going to be low scoring, but I do think these guys, these main guys in fantasy, will get their production this week.
Yeah, as far as it goes with the Rams offense, like I'm starting my guys this week. Puka is being placed in there. Cooper Kupp's being placed in there. There's a lot of negativity right now around Puka, just based off the fact that he's not scoring the 30 points that he was scoring the first couple weeks. It doesn't really matter to me. Talk about high ceiling here. 4 out of the last 5 weeks, Puka Nacua has been double fantasy points, and target share is still there, very much so. Finishing just shy of double-digit targets in pretty much every single one of those weeks. Hasn't had under 7 targets in a game all season. And so I think that the workload's going to be there for him. I think that, yes, tough matchup, but I also think that looking at how New Orleans plays, I think they're going to really channel in on Cooper. And so for a guy like Puka Nacua, I think there's a big opportunity there.
Yeah, I agree with you. I do think the focus will end up being on Kupp tonight. So Nacua could be in for a good one, Brett.
All right. And then just on the New Orleans side, I mean, got to with obviously Alvin Kamara, and, you're playing him plain and simple. But as far as the rest of the lineup goes, like, we're looking at playing anybody. Obviously, like Olave, he's probably gonna play, but we don't know if he's 100% and all of that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm an Olave owner. I'm going to be starting him tonight. I think he's just there's some situations where in mine I don't really have too much else that I would feel confident starting over Olave, even though he might not be 100%. I still think he can get going in this one. It's not a great matchup. It's just stand in the middle. So a solid LA defense. I do think Olave will get his points. Kamara actually has a tough matchup against this front in LA, but I still think you have to start Alvin Kamara. Like, he'll get his fantasy points. He'll put up some numbers. It's a primetime game. You got to kind of take that into consideration. But other than those two, I'm probably staying away from really anybody in New Orleans, Brett.
Yeah, Olave, taking off the injury report, no designation for him heading into this one. So yeah, I mean, if you have him, you're playing him. I don't think that you're benching Olave in this one. And as far as Kamara goes, yeah, the workload has been insane. Look for this to be one of those games where they really try to put the push on Derek Carr, make him uncomfortable. So we might see a lot of dump offs here, like we did a few weeks ago when they tried to do that against Kamara, and he just what do you have, like 14 catches?
Yeah, insane.
Yeah, I think we'll see one of the. I don't know that it will be 14 catches, but I think we can be, double-digit targets at least towards Alvin Kamara based off the pass rush.
Yep, definitely.
All right, so your question here: what's up, guys? DK Metcalf or T Higgins this week? Another one that I think is kind of close here. What do you think?
I mean, I think you got to look at the matchup here. I know that. Of course, T. Higgins now is going to be the number one with Jamar out, but he's going up against Pittsburgh on the road in Pittsburgh. I'm going to go with DK Metcalf, who, yeah, it was silent for a while, for 3 quarters. It really was silent from DK against Philly, but they're going up against this Tennessee team who they let up a ton, and I mean a ton of yards to wide receivers, and their secondary has just been a disaster this year. I'm going with the guy in DK Metcalf, has the better matchup. And I think, Brett, what we've seen against Tennessee is you can't really run against them. So they're not going to really rely on that run game. They're going to be throwing the ball. They're going to be on the road. No matter who's at quarterback, they'll be throwing the ball around. I think DK, you got to start him in the fantasy semifinals. Like, he's one of the guys that probably brought you there.
I agree. High floor, high ceiling. It's simple. I think that T. Higgins has shown that he could disappear through games. And, obviously Chase is not going to be there this week. So I think there's going to be a little more extra attention here paid to T. Higgins. Not a good matchup. It just isn't. It's not. And as far as DK goes, he's playing against a team that's probably going to try to channel the run. And so, obviously try to stop that two-headed monster running back. And so I think that this is one of those games where we see a guy like DK Metcalf get his points, and his target share has been great all season long. Just kind of keep riding here. So high floor, high ceiling. I'm taking DK.
Yeah, I agreed, Brett.
All right, let's jump right into Pittsburgh as they host Cincinnati the Saturday 4:30 p.m. start. Let's just quickly break down Pittsburgh here, because I think that it's been sort of interesting the last couple of weeks with regards to how they've had the running backs go. Jaylen Warren versus Najee Harris. It's been kind of split. Najee Harris, 12 carries, 33 yards. He did have a fumble, so lost a couple points there. Jaylen Warren, 10 carries, 40 yards, and he also added 5 catches for 28 yards in the air. So are we starting either one of these running backs here going forward?
I don't know if I can, Brett. I really don't. I think it's kind of, you can go either way on it, but this matchup's just, it's okay. It's an okay matchup. I do think Cincy's defense has been a lot better recently, and they figure things out. Of course, they got ran all over by Ty Chandler last week, but there's no clear number one here. So that's the problem for me. And I don't know if I can trust that in my lineup heading into a semifinal matchup. Like that's very, very tough. I would probably, if I was going to go with anybody, it would be Warren, because of the ability out of getting catches out of the backfield, especially PPR. That's huge, but it's very, very tough to really rely on either one of these guys because they kind of they take points away from each other. That's the biggest thing. And usually in those backfields, you usually choose to stay away.
Yeah, I agree. I think that it's Warren over Harris if you had to pick one, but I don't trust either one of them. Warren hasn't scored a touchdown in his last 4 games. I think that that's pretty important in terms of when we look at the running back position, and it's not like the volume is there. It's a split right down the middle pretty much every single week. And so I'm staying away from them. I don't know that I can absolutely trust them. Also, quick here, because Pickett is not going to start. Mason Rudolph is going to end up being the starter, it looks like. And I think that really limits the ceiling of Deontay Johnson. You're a Deontay guy. Like, you have been one for quite a few seasons. Are you starting him this week?
So it's tough because I'm in one of these leagues, and it's kind of like I don't really have much behind Deontay, so I'm gonna plug him in my lineup. I will say the one positive for me from Deontay, and I'll give some positive to Deontay owners. Like, this is Mason Rudolph starting, and of course Mason Rudolph, the last time he was in, Deontay was getting a lot of volume. That was I think almost a couple of years ago at this point, but like a lot of volume. So he's still the number one option. If he goes to his number one guy, it's Deontay Johnson. I don't think it's Pat Freiermuth. I don't think it's George Pickens. And I don't think it's one of the running backs. If he's going to his number one guy, it is Deontay Johnson. So from that standpoint, get some catches, get the volume of Deontay Johnson. If he gets, 6 for 55, Brett, I'll be happy. I'll be good enough with that. That's good enough for me. Just get those yards, get the volume. Doesn't even need to get into the end zone. I think that's good enough for me, and he's the number one option. So I feel like Rudolph will be looking for him in a game that they might be losing, Brett, because this Cincy offense has been rolling the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, as far as Cincy goes, also interesting because we just talked T. Higgins a bit. Like, he's probably a wide receiver too. If obviously Chase is not playing, which it was announced that he is out this morning by head coach Zach Taylor. So Higgins is probably wide receiver 2. Obviously, he has the potential of wide receiver 1 numbers. But I also think that, like I just said, they're going to channel more attention to him. I think that not having Chase in there actually helps Joe Mixon more than anybody. Last week wasn't that amazing of a week. Mixon, he only had 3 catches out of the air for 14 yards and 10 carries for 47 yards. Did get in the end zone, which did save his day. But yeah, I'm riding Joe Mixon here to the finish line. I think that it's a guy I've had on my team, and it's really just made a difference here the last bulk of the season here.
Yeah, Brett, it's an interesting one. I think, of course, you're starting Mixon, and he's gonna probably be I would say RB2 with RB1 upside, because I mean, this offense without Chase, what is it like? Where are they gonna go? Are they gonna throw it? Are they gonna rely on Jake Browning, or are they gonna rely on that run game? I think they'll end up giving more carries to Mixon. I agree with you there. The thing about Browning is, people are putting him kind of on the radar. He's a super flex play, and that's it. Like, don't even think about like going into this week and starting a guy like Jake Browning over one of your top quarterbacks. I've seen that a couple times this week. I'm not a believer in that. I even though of course, yes, this offense has been rolling, I'm staying away from that. I think the 2 people in this offense it's T. Higgins and Joe Mixon. Tyler Boyd, I'd probably keep him off the radar, even though he's going to be the number 2 option. Just not a big believer that he can really boom this week. Hasn't had a lot of that. He only had 2 catches last week. One he turned into a big one, but I do think it's just these 2 in Higgins and Mixon, bro.
Yeah, I agree. Let's jump right into the next one here. Buffalo at the Los Angeles Chargers. 8 p.m. start. Zach, let's first break down some Buffalo Bills here.
Yeah, I mean, start your guys. it's Josh Allen, it's James Cook, it's Stephon Diggs, and yeah, Dalton Kincaid was pretty rough last week. I would probably put him as a high end tight end 2. I think that's probably the spot for him, even though it's a good matchup against the Chargers this week. I still end up thinking that if you rely on your Buffalo guys, you get Diggs, you get Josh Allen in there, and you get James Cook. Those 3 will kind of lead things for the Chargers or for the Bills this week against the Chargers, who just have not been great on defense. I think James Cook can have a really monster week, and we haven't seen a lot from Stephon Diggs recently, but I think he can start to get it going. He's got a really, really good matchup this week. The Chargers were absolutely trounced last week by the Raiders. Their secondary is wide open right now. I'm looking for a bounce back from Stephon Diggs because it has not been easy in the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting because, if you take a look at the target share and all of that, like the target share is still there. It just hasn't been the production. And that's what's kind of scary. And so, listen, Dallas did a really good job of locking him down. Only had 4 catches for 48 yards. Only had 5 targets in this because he really just couldn't get open. They were doubling him pretty much every time that he got out there. And so now a bit of an easier matchup. Obviously, we saw what the Chargers defense did that led to the firing of head coach Brandon Staley. I don't know that it's going to be that much of a blowout, but at the same time, it's not. I don't think that this game is going to be as close as people are making it out to be. I'm taking the Buffalo guys in here, and I'm just kind of starting my guys here. And we just went on a whole rant about James Cook. I think that James Cook has the potential that if they ride him the way that they did, he can finish as a running back 1 by the end of this.
Yeah, I definitely agree, Brett. And I'll just jump into the Chargers, and it has not been a great time for Austin Eckler recently. I would say, like this week, yeah, you're probably gonna end up putting Austin Eckler in your lineup. I don't know how confident you are of that. This Buffalo front has been better as weeks have gone on. I would still be confident in Eckler just because of the passing game out of the backfield. He's playing with Easton Stick, who is a young quarterback, and well, not entirely young, but young in experience when it comes to the NFL. So of course, he's going to end up throwing to Austin Eckler out of the backfield. I think that's going to be the biggest thing. They'll be down in this game. I think they'll be down a lot. So I end up residing with Eckler owners. You got to put him in your lineup. He probably is a low end RB2. I'd probably put him in that range right now. Yeah, some people would say high end flex. That's fair too. There's just not much going on in this offense, Brett, in terms of wide receiver. I know Palmer broke out for a big play. Quentin Johnston kind of struggled. They kind of got a couple of other guys involved. I'm not confident in really any of these guys to throw them in my lineup in a semifinal matchup.
I agree. I think that Josh Palmer is probably a flex option. I probably am benching Quentin Johnston. Gerald, listen, he's been really consistent the whole year. The problem is that his ceiling is not really high. It's been this low. It's been a high floor, low ceiling pretty much the entire season. And then even Eckler. Listen, Eckler has not become this like must start number one guy this year. If your lineup is pretty stacked, then you're kind of asking questions. That said, I'm probably playing him because he's Austin Eckler. But I was talking the other day to the guy in our league who owns Austin Eckler in Dynasty, and he's nervous about the future of Austin Eckler and whether that cliff comes now or the cliff comes in a year from now. Like, it seems like the cliff is coming quicker than we really thought. Obviously, now he heads into a free agency situation, and we obviously broke down week after week with Jonathan Taylor and what the money situation and all of that was like. He's Jonathan Taylor. He's just not. We're seeing the cliff come very quickly on Eckler. And so, listen, last week he had 5 carries for 9 yards. They went to Isaiah Spiller, who had 16 carries for 50 yards pretty quick. And so, yes, you're starting Eckler this week. If you're stacked, I'm asking questions this week, though.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think just looking at Eckler, it's a contract year. It's a tough time right now in LA for a lot of guys. And of course, Keenan Allen out for this one. It might get ugly on Saturday night, Brett.
Yeah, J-Rod here with the comment. Eckler was worth a first round via trade earlier this year. Not so much now. I agree. I think that he's probably worth a second rounder. And yes, Spiller, great pickup. Definitely a guy to go out and go grab in Dynasty, because I think that the value going forward for him is pretty high, because I think that it's a guy that they sort of believe in here going forward.
Yeah, definitely, Brett.
All right, so breaking down our next matchup here, Cleveland at Houston. Zach, let's first start out with Houston, because, at the top of the show, we talked about CJ Stroud and what his situation is, and he's probably not going to play this week. They don't want to rush him. As far as the receivers go here, Nico Collins right now, questionable. We'll see what happens. His calf injury and again, a lingering thing here. He was a limited participant on Wednesday at practice, but, does it really matter here if he does have a quarterback like Case Keenum?
So, I mean, it's interesting because Nico Collins, it's different from a guy like Noah Brown, because Nico Collins, like, anytime he's in the lineup, like, he'll get his targets, versus a guy like Noah Brown where you're kind of pushing something. If he does get his targets, then you're happy, but he might not. There's a lot of risk there. I feel like if Nico Collins is in there, he's a flex play for me. I would say Noah Brown probably end up staying away at that point. The thing I'll say about Devin Singletary is it's a really tough matchup this week. That's the biggest thing for almost all of these guys. Cleveland's defense really, really tough. So I'd probably end up like staying away from a lot of guys. Collins is a flex play for me. I would say the same about Singletary.
I agree. And then just last one, Dalton Schultz. I'm staying away from him as well, especially with the quarterback situation. I don't really know what Case Keenum's tendencies with tight ends are versus if it was Stroud out there. Last week, he only had 4 catches, 58 yards. Probably better options there at tight end. As far as Noah Brown goes, I'm really only playing him if Collins can't go. Otherwise, on my bench. Plain and simple. If Collins plays, I'm playing him. He'll probably be a wide receiver 2. Not as much of the high ceiling, just based on the cap of the of the quarterback. But as far as the defense goes, this is going to be a difficult matchup, I think, on both sides. And so I'm kind of staying away from most of the guys here in this matchup.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you. Cleveland, it's a weird one here. Also, I would say Jerome Ford is kind of on the radar, but he's a flex player right now for me. I'd probably end up staying away. I'm a Ford owner in a couple of leagues. I'm probably staying away this week. It's kind of very boom or bust. Flacco, it has a good week one week, then it's a bad week another week. Amari Cooper's an interesting one, I would say. He's on the flex radar. I don't know how confident I am there. I would probably say a flex play. He's probably going to end up being in your lineup just because he's Amari Cooper and he's put up points kind of consistently over the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, had 4 catches, 109, and a touchdown last week. He did have 8 targets, which I think that was pretty good. Obviously, we heard the Joe Flacco story and gets a contract, and so now the rest of the year, it's going to be the Joe Flacco show. And I think that he's sort of forming this camaraderie with Njoku, with Cooper. Those 2 guys I'm starting. I think Njoku's, if you have him, you're playing him, unless, of course, you have the very, very top of the tight end tier. But Njoku, I think, is one of those guys right now. He had 14 targets last week, 10 catches for 104 and a touchdown. You're probably keeping him in there. And then Cooper, yeah, I just think it's a wide range of outcomes in terms of he has a very low floor but a very high ceiling, if that makes sense. It could be any range of outcomes. I'm probably starting him, but like you just said, I'm probably starting him in a flex spot.
Yeah, I agree, Brett.
All right, so let's jump to our next matchup here. It is the Jets against Washington. Zach, quickly on the Jets here. Seems like Zach Wilson's not going to play in this one. There's still a couple days left here before the game, but he's run into concussion protocol. We heard dehydration. We heard all these different reports. He's in concussion protocol, would have to clear. Trevor Siemian would be the backup, with Brett being the third stringer, and he comes in as the backup. Siemian would be the starter. They activated Aaron Rodgers. He's not going to play for the rest of the year. Robert Saleh was very clear about that. As they look to next year, they activated him strictly for practices here. But now we head into a matchup where it's kind of juicy. Even with the Trevor Siemian sort of quarterbacking here, I think this is a potential game where Garrett Wilson could finish as a top 15 wide receiver.
Breece Hall, Garrett Wilson, Jets defense, Brett. I mean, that's kind of been the motto every game for the last couple of weeks for this Jets team. Those 3 guys, the 2 guys, and then the Jets defense, I'd feel comfortable with all 3. They're going to be rock solid this week. It's a really good matchup against Washington. Weak defense that they really can take advantage of. So I would be comfortable with any one of those guys.
I agree. I think that all 3 of those guys are starters there. As far as Washington goes, it's a little bit different here because normally I would say Terry McLaurin's, set it and forget it. I don't know that it's like that, though, this week. Just based on the fact that it's the Jets, corners, and they've been really, really good all year. So, yes, they've been playing sides, and they haven't been playing the matchups. And so no matter which side he goes on, he either has to go against Gardner or DJ Reed. And to me, that lowers the expectations here. So he's probably a flex option. You're probably playing him, but you got to make sure your expectations are pretty low on this one.
Yeah, Brett, I actually I probably would say he's the only one on my radar right now for Washington. Of course, Brian Robinson probably not coming back this week. There's still a question mark there. Antonio Gibson, I would put him as a low end flex. That's probably it. I would say McLaurin, he's a flex right now, but I don't know how anybody can really be confident in this matchup going up against this Jets defense. They've been really rock solid so far this year. And a 1v1, Terry McLaurin, Sauce Gardner, it's not going to be an easy day for Terry McLaurin.
Yeah, and I think just lastly, Curtis Samuel, he's a desperation flex. I don't think it's anything more. Just sort of depends on the size of your league and what potential options you have. That's a good, I think, potentially could have some sort of output. But I don't think that McLaurin's going to have that big of an output because I think that they're going to play him a little extra tighter.
Yeah, definitely.
All right, so jumping to our next matchup here, it is Seattle, Tennessee. Sunday, the 1:00 start. Zach, let's start out with Seattle. We talked about them a bit at the top of the show, getting the 2017 win over the Eagles. It was Kenneth Walker who had 19 carries, 86 yards, and a score, where it sort of looked a couple weeks ago like he was sort of tailing off, and it might be Zach Charbonnet coming in. Then, of course, Kenneth Walker gets hurt, and they get the starting role. Now it seems like Kenneth Walker is back. I'm pretty confident playing him here the rest of the way.
Yeah, definitely. A solid RB2 every single week. Like he's going to be an RB2 with RB1 upside. I think that's probably fair. And where he's kind of been for most of this season, I would say this matchup, yeah, it's the one that we look out for. It's against Tennessee. The positive on that is you look in the passing game and he's gotten some catches out of the backfield recently. He got 3 of them last week. So that's been an uptick of what he usually ends up getting. He doesn't get a lot out of the backfield when it comes to the receiving game. So I think that's huge for him. Of course, Geno Smith probably going to be back for this one. So that's kind of changes things around as well. It makes me more confident in these wide receivers, Brett, because of course Drew Lock had some solid games, but I feel like the upside of these guys in terms of fantasy football, they just kind of go through the roof. And especially in a matchup against Tennessee, I feel comfortable starting any one of these guys in Metcalf, Lockett, even Smith and Jigba. I'd kind of put them on the radar because it's just that good of a matchup. I would say the bottom two, and Lockett and, of course, Smith and Jigba are flex plays. Metcalf, of course, is a wide receiver too.
I agree. I think that two guys flex plays for me. Certainly starting Kenneth Walker. And, listen, there was a series in there where, look, he got banged up. Zach Charbonnet came in, only had 4 carries, 16 yards on that series. Quickly, they go back to Walker. So he did. He looked explosive. He looked like the Kenneth Walker that we know. So I really have no, hate toward him. I'm playing him this week in my lineup.
Yeah, 100%, Brett. And as for Tennessee, like things are kind of same as usual. Of course, Derrick Henry, there's always the question marks there. I'd still be starting him. Like it's the semifinal in the fantasy playoffs. You're still starting Derrick Henry, of course. And I will look at DeAndre Hopkins, and that's probably it for me. I would say Hopkins is a low end wide receiver 2, high end flex play, wide receiver 3 range in that area. I would feel comfortable with either one of those guys, Henry or Hopkins, this week.
I agree. Listen, as for the Seahawks go, they've had the 7th most points allowed to wide receivers this season, and so I think this could be a good game here for Hopkins. We talked about the non-PPR question we had earlier in the show. Like, there's that touchdown play potential. They might be down in this game. They'll be throwing the ball. Look for a guy like Tajay Spears to even contribute. Obviously not playing him this week, but as far as the dynasty perspective goes, and teams that are already out are sort of like last year when I was out of the playoffs, I was looking for my guys to still produce even though I was out, because you sort of want to look forward. You want those plays to go up so that way you can potentially trade them in the offseason. I think that Tajay Spears here down the stretch is going to prove his worth. I think we're going to get more passing work here.
Definitely agree, bro.
All right, so jumping to our next matchup here, the Indianapolis Colts travel to Atlanta to take on the Atlanta Falcons. Zach, we got to talk about last week and the big disappointment out of Bijan, so I'm going to leave the mic to you. Mr. Bijan owner there, take it away.
I'm at a loss for words, Brett. I think like you just look at it. It's not just Bijan. It's Drake London and Kyle Pitts. You draft these guys super early. You get them like in this offense, you're ready to go, a bunch of young stars, and you go up against Carolina on the road. I know the conditions were awful. They were terrible, and it ended up forcing a fumble out of Bijan. But how do you not give any one of these three like a really good workload, relying on Tyler Algier for most of the game? I get it, but you got Bijan Robinson, the most explosive player arguably in the NFL. Like that's where you put him, and you put him in some bad spots. So hopefully it can end up being better this week. I'm still starting him. He has a great matchup this week, Brett. Indy has not been good against running backs. So hopefully he has a monster week to kind of bounce back for his fantasy owners in the semifinal. I think of those three guys, it's Bijan and Drake London. I think Kyle Pitts you kind of put lower on the radar, just because there's kind of other tight ends that you definitely would rely on more than a guy like Kyle Pitts this week.
So if you have Bijan, you're playing him. I can't get over the Drake London thing. I really can't. It's a guy that I'm probably going to bench this week. I have him, and I'm not excited to play him. So probably staying away from him. He's a flex option, I think, at best right now. It sort of was that desperation play even earlier in the season where we didn't know which were going to be boom weeks and which were going to be week. So listen, I think 2 catches, 24 yards. He only had 3 targets, and we'll talk about Arthur Smith, obviously, over the next couple of weeks as we start to break down dynasty values and the future of the Falcons. And we'll see what happens to Arthur Smith, obviously, over the next couple of weeks and whether he keeps a job or gets fired. This was it was a huge disappointment this week. So I'm sticking with those 2 guys, but Drake London's more of the desperation play. You probably have better options on your team.
Definitely fair. I think you can also look at last week. Deontay Johnson had an okay game. It wasn't a great game, but did end up getting in the end zone, got some stuff. So like against this Indy D, it's a little bit vulnerable. However, in that game, the game script was a lot different than I think it'll be in this Atlanta against Colts game.
Just some breaking news here. Chargers have officially ruled out Keenan Allen Saturday night versus Buffalo. Doesn't exactly change anything that we said. We didn't even break down Keenan Allen. We expected him to be out. He is officially ruled out, and so make sure that you go into your lineups and take him out because he will not be playing. As far as it goes in Indianapolis, I think this is going to be one of those games where Jonathan Taylor just comes in and takes over the rest of the season. Maybe that's just wishful thinking because I've been on the Jonathan Taylor train pretty much the entire season, but it's not a bad matchup at all for him. And it seems like Zach Moss is a little banged up. He left the game early, and so with the shoulder injury, and so I think that this could be a potential boom game here down the stretch for Jonathan Taylor.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think they're going to ride with Jonathan Taylor. Obviously, still question marks on Michael Pittman. That's a big story going on right now for Indianapolis. I think he's questionable right now. Still kind of waiting on how he does in practice this week, Brett. So if Pittman does play, you lock him in your lineup. If he doesn't play, I'd say Josh Downs is a flex play at best. I'm not a huge believer that if Pittman's out, they're going to just throw a ton to Josh Downs. I think they'll rely on Taylor a little bit more to kind of eat into that workload. So I think it'll be a Jonathan Taylor game. I agree with you. So start him. You're probably very happy to have him back. I know you are, Brett.
Yeah, certainly. And then, I agree with you on Pittman. If he's playing, you're locking him in there, plain and simple. Josh Downs, I think another guy who could potentially have a good game, especially if Pittman's not in there, going to get the bulk of the attention. And then Minshew Mania. I think this is another thing that we need to break down. He was very good last week. He was 18 of 28, 215 yards, threw 3 touchdowns. And so, listen, he's a super flex option here this week. You know, we talk of those deeper leagues here. I think you're playing Gardner Minshew as your second quarterback here.
Yeah, clearly, like Superflex, I'd lock them in. It's a good matchup against Atlanta. They kind of let quarterbacks go to town on them, so I would definitely be comfortable with Minshew in Superflex.
All right, so jump into our next matchup here: Green Bay at Carolina. So Carolina comes off a win this week. We just talked about Atlanta. It was a 9-7 win. Listen, you can't have all bets. But Chuba Hubbard seemed to get the bulk of the work here. 22 carries for 87 yards. Also added 2 catches for 16 yards in the air. Are you starting him in your lineup this weekend?
Jordan Love.
No, Chuba Hubbard. Chuba Hubbard.
Oh, Chuba Hubbard. I think you said Jordan Love. Chuba Hubbard. Yes, I'm starting him this week. I'd feel comfortable with it because I think he's the lead guy in this offense, and it kind of runs through him. It is a little bit of a better matchup for him against this Green Bay team. They kind of let running backs go to work, and Rachaad White had a field day last week, so I'd be comfortable with Chuba Hubbard in my lineup. I would say a low end RB2. It's probably where I'd put him just because he gets that workload. He gets the volume. So I think that's huge for him. Anybody else on Carolina, I'd probably say Adam Thielen's a flex play. Some people would stay away. I'd probably agree with them just because I know they might end up being down, but it's just an okay matchup. If it was a better matchup for him, I'd feel more comfortable with it. But I feel like some people might just have some better options than Adam Thielen this week.
I agree, and I think that the only one I would add in there, in the very deep league, I think that Jonathan Mingo actually gets a look here as a potential flex option there, just based off of the workload is starting to rise each week. The snap shares started to rise each week. It is a potential guy that, as they start to develop this quarterback, he could start to look other ways. I think he's sort of getting this chemistry now with Mingo.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I'll just take it to Green Bay, Brett. Obviously, there's a question mark right now. I'll talk first about Jordan Love since I was excited to do so already. I think this one's a tough matchup. I would probably end up staying away in redraft, like one quarterback leagues. I think you still got to start him, of course, in Superflex because he's probably one of your top 2 guys. But this is not an easy matchup. They're going up against Carolina. It is in Carolina, so that changes things a little bit as well. They got the win in front of their home crowd last week, so they'll be firing. I think they'll be going for another win here, the Panthers. So it's going to be a tough matchup for Love. I'd kind of limit expectations for a lot of guys in the passing game this week, Brett. Jaden Reed is a question mark right now. Does not look great because he left the game last week with a toe injury, then ended up not practicing yesterday, and things have not looked great heading into this weekend for him to play. So if that is the case, Christian Watson, also another guy who's questionable. I don't know if I can really trust anybody in this passing game. I think that's the biggest thing right now. Aaron Jones, I'll ride with him. I don't know how confident I am, but he got a good workload last week without Dillon, and there's no better matchup than the Carolina run defense. So I'd be riding with Aaron Jones and, of course, Jordan Love, like I said. But the receivers, it's just difficult to really trust anybody this week.
I agree. I think that as far as it goes, if Reed plays, if Watson plays, their potential flex options. If they don't play, I like Dontavian Wicks, actually. It was a one-touch candidate that I had for this week. I see the potential. He had 7 targets last week, 6 catches for 97 yards. He's a guy who's been able to make some plays here. And I think going forward, they're going to start to utilize him a bit more. And obviously, the match is good, and his competition on his own team isn't playing. Like, Jordan Love's going to have to throw it to somebody. So I would definitely keep an eye on David Wicks. He's out there in like 96% of leagues. So he should probably be out there unless you're in the deepest of deep leagues. Dynasty leagues, I think he's a very good ad, at least this week, as a potential guy. And then as far as the tight ends go, like, I'm staying away from them. But Tucker Kraft same thing in dynasty. Like, I think we've started to see this. He's a potential streaming option, tight end premium option going forward here from a dynasty perspective. Definitely an ad.
Yeah, I agree. He's definitely an ad, somebody to keep on the radar, because at one of these weeks he could definitely end up booming, especially if they're down some of their top wides.
So let's go over to the other side of the NFC North as Detroit heads to Minnesota for a Sunday showdown. Zach, let's start out with the Lions here. And, Sam Laporta, I think it's very clear that you're starting him. Jahmyr Gibbs, I think it's very clear you're starting him. What about the rest of their team here? Oh, and Amon-Ra, you're probably starting him too.
Yeah, I was going to say, those three really stand out for me. I'm one of those people who lost Justin Herbert. I said that last week, and Jared Goff is my go-to. Thank you, Jared Goff, for sending me to the semifinals. You did that pretty easily. I'm hoping for a lot of the same. He's a low-end QB1 for me. I probably end up – there's some people who just put him in because this offense is rolling. I'm fine with it. Like, even though it's a bit of a tougher matchup going up against Minnesota, their defense has improved a lot from where they were a season ago. I still feel confident in Goff, even though it's on the road. Like, he can get the job done in a matchup like this if he finds his guys. Those three guys really, they're 100% lineup locks. Put them in your lineup. The question, of course, now begs to David Montgomery, Brett. I still think he's on the flex radar. He has an upside of an RB2, but I think a flex spot is probably the spot for him right now. When it comes to Gibbs, though, he's in RB1 territory. Just based on the volume he's gotten, how good he's been, he's an RB1 for me.
I agree. He got less carries last week than Montgomery even had. He had 11 carries for 100 yards. Montgomery had 17 carries, had 85 yards. So, listen, the snaps have been very split. And that's sort of why I would say that Montgomery is probably a low-end running back to a flex option. Like, I'm probably still playing him if I'm in that spot. But obviously there's some teams that went running back heavy in the draft. And so you might have three of those guys who figure out to be running 1 to 2 range. And so that's sort of the position that I'm in one of our leagues, where I'm questioning whether or not I want to actually play David Montgomery this week.
Yeah, I think it's one of those guys that you can kind of go either way on. That's why I'd probably say a flex spot. There's a bunch of guys who can end up being in flex consideration. Just pick your best one, because, of course, last week it was a little bit tougher for Joe Mixon. He didn't have a great day against this Minnesota front. So you can also take that into consideration when looking at this week.
And then lastly, as far as deeper league ads here, available in 88% of leagues is Jameson Williams, who had a pretty good target share last week. 10 targets on the day, had 4 catches for 47 yards. He's sort of just getting open down the field, and he's not really giving Goff much of a choice he has to throw to him, because he seems to be wide open on a lot of these plays here. Certainly a dynasty guy that's a buy low right now. Obviously, as far as the redraft goes, you're probably not playing him this week, but if you're shortening up your bench here, I think that it's a guy you potentially can go out and add in the event that one of these receivers, one of these weapons does go down with some injuries this week, and then you're sort of in a bind for next week.
Yeah, I agree with you, Brett. And as for Minnesota, we kind of touched on them earlier when we were talking about Addison. Of course, you're starting Jefferson if he's in. And of course, I would say you're starting Addison now, because he kind of proved that he's going to be still a solid option. He's a flex play right now. Of course, you're starting Hawkinson as well. And Ty Chandler had a great game. Great game for Minnesota. I would probably be putting him in my lineup again. He's, I would say, around an RB2. Maybe just a little lower than that. I would probably end up just putting him in my lineup. It's not a great matchup, but this workload in this backfield is unbelievable what he's been getting. So, especially last week. So I would be comfortable starting him once again, especially even though fantasy semifinals, Brett.
Yeah, I agree. I just think the volume is there. 23 carries, 132 yards, and a score. Also added 3 catches for 25 yards in the air. And, we talked about Minnesota earlier in the year. They brought in Cam Akers. They were trying to get something going at the running back position because obviously it seemed like they had it figured out through the air. Quite a few weapons on the offense: Addison, Hockenson, Jefferson. So even KJ Osborne, like they had a ton of weapons heading into this year. And so Madison wasn't really holding up his end of the bargain. They bring in Cam Akers. He goes down with injury. Now Madison's down with injury. They finally figure out, hey, Tyler's pretty good at football. So they give him the bulk of the work here. I think that, yes, semifinals, I'm still playing him. He's a flex consideration just based on the matchup, but he's a good flex consideration at that. So I think you're playing him there. Nick Mullins, I talked weapons a second ago. I think Nick Mullins is a really good super flex candidate actually this week. Probably mid-tier quarterback too. High floor, and that's sort of what we're looking for here. I think the high floor is there for Nick Mullins and the potential that in this matchup, if he gets some good action here, it could be a big day.
Yeah, interesting, Brett. Mullins could end up being on the radar for this week.
All right, so jumping to our next matchup here, Sunday in the 4:05 window now, Jacksonville at Tampa Bay. Zach, we got out with a weekly, oh my God, about Mike Evans. He wasn't that great this week. It was subdued. 4 catches, 57 yards for a score. Still finishes double digits, though. And I think that Mike Evans, you probably play him probably a wide receiver 1, I would say.
He's a wide receiver 1, 100%. Like Mike Evans' floor, if I can just talk about like perfect wide receiver for fantasy, when it comes to floor, it'd be Mike Evans because you know what you're going to get. He's going to put up numbers each and every week, and he gets the touchdown also. So, like, they're always looking for him. It's going to be another good matchup this week against Jacksonville. Have not been great against wide receivers, have struggled a bit lately against wide receivers, although there wasn't a ton from Jacksonville or from Baltimore, last week that they went to. They ended up going to Isaiah Likely a lot, their tight end. But the wide receivers, like, they have not been great against wide receivers, Jacksonville's defense. So I think Mike Evans is in for a really, really good week once again. Godwin had a great game. Of course, the one team that I had Godwin, I'm out in the playoffs now. So because he was not great for most of the season, but once we got there, he really stepped up. So a really solid game for him. I'd put him on the flex radar still. That's kind of where he's been. I'd say he's probably there once again. Does have a questionable tag right now due to a knee problem. So just kind of keep that on your radar. And then Rachaad White is locked into most lineups, I would say, Brett. Like, even though it's kind of been iffy a lot of the year, I think you, based on the volume, have to put him in low-end running back 1 territory because of the volume. He puts up numbers a lot, and I think he's going to be another solid game for him this week against Jacksonville.
I agree. Just update on Chris Godwin. He did not practice today. And so just, we'll monitor updates on there. If he doesn't play, then Mike Evans is probably going to finish as a wide receiver 1 just because I think he's going to get an enormous workload. Godwin had 12 targets last week. I think those all sort of go to Mike Evans. This could be one of those games where they just keep feeding Evans. Baker Mayfield, I think, is probably also a high-end super flex play, if not even a lower-end quarterback 1, depending on your situation. Listen, he's just been really good this year. 22 of 28, 381 yards, threw 4 touchdowns last week against Green Bay. He's probably in my lineup, at least from the Superflex standpoint, where there's probably a debate come 1 quarterback leagues.
Yeah, also a great matchup for him. Jacksonville not great against quarterbacks in fantasy this year. So Baker definitely on the radar.
Certainly. And then as far as it goes on the Jacksonville side, Travis Etienne wasn't amazing last week. 10 carries, 31 yards. They were playing against Baltimore, though. I think that you sort of throw the tape away a little bit. Only scored 7 points in the entire game. And so, listen, Tampa's not a great matchup for him, but I don't know if you can shy away from putting Etienne in your lineup. The one I'm most curious about is Calvin Ridley here, and whether he can bounce back from what has been, a couple games here where he didn't exactly perform to those boom games that he had earlier in the year. I'm probably playing him as a low-end wide receiver too, if not a flex option, just because I think that there will be that sort of rebound. As far as it goes with Evan Ingram, like you're probably playing him unless you have a better option. In one of my leagues, I'm playing Trey McBride over him, but it's probably neck and neck. I think that's probably the biggest debate I had this week in my lineups is Ingram or McBride. But yeah, you're probably playing him as well. And then, who else do we have on here?
That's it. I think when you look at it, ETN, like you got to lock him in your lineup. Even though it's a tougher matchup, definitely got to start him. When it comes to Calvin Ridley, I'm expecting a huge week because, of course, Christian Kirk is out right now. And I think Zay Jones is going to be out as well for this week. I had a knee problem last week that I don't think he'll end up playing this week against Tampa. And we talk about Tampa's secondary. It's the team to go after when it comes to their secondary. So I'm expecting a big game and a lot of targets for Calvin Ridley. Of course, you mentioned Evan Ingram as well. I'm expecting a big game from him too. So lock him in your lineup as well at the tight end position.
Yeah, and it should also be noted that it seems like CJ Beathard is going to end up being the starter in this game. Trevor Lawrence, concussion, ankle. He did not practice today. And so he didn't practice yesterday either. I'm not sure he's going to play this week, but at the same time, I still think that it doesn't really affect those weapons and those values.
Yeah, I agree with you.
All right, so we have a viewer question here from Mo. Have Cooper Kupp starting. Need to bench one. Puka Nacua, Kenneth Walker, or David Montgomery. Zach, who are you benching out of this?
Yeah, Brett, it kind of leads back to what we were talking about earlier. I think it's got to be Montgomery that you bench here because, of course, the matchup for Puka Nacua is pretty solid based on that. You would think they're going to focus in this New Orleans defense on Cooper Kupp. That's going to be the focus for them. So I think Puka Nacua, even though you have Cooper Kupp already, I'd start both because just why not? I think they can both have solid fantasy days. And of course, Kenneth Walker, you're starting him against Tennessee. The volume that he gets is unmatched. There's not many like Kenneth Walker in the NFL. And I think Montgomery, we talked about this matchup's a little bit tougher. Joe Mixon did not have a good day against this Minnesota front last week. So I would definitely be benching Montgomery of those three.
Yeah, I agree. I just think that it's sort of, listen, you're playing the odds. Somebody's going to go off in LA. I think they both can have good days, but one of the two of them is going to have a better day. And so, I like that matchup. We can't take him out after last week, plain and simple. And so, yeah, the odd man out is Montgomery. It's a situation that I found myself in. I have Devon Achane, and so, trying to figure out exactly what I'm going to do. I still haven't made that decision yet, and obviously there's still time between the two, which one to bench and which one to play. These are the questions that get asked in fantasy football. So, yes, on this decision, I'm going to take Montgomery out of my lineup there.
Yeah, definitely.
All right, so jumping to our next matchup, Arizona, as they travel to Chicago, 4:25 start. Zach, let's start out with Arizona because, we talked at the top of the show about Trey McBride. So you're probably playing him. He's a very high-end tight end one. As far as the rest of the offense goes, this is a tough test this week, actually, for, I would say, James Conner.
Yeah, not a great matchup for Conner this week at Chicago. I mean, they're a solid front. I would say James Conner's it's kind of a middle of the pack matchup, but Conner's in that like flex territory. He's right there. I would say he's next to guys like David Montgomery and Austin Eckler, like who we talked about before, Devin Singletary. Those kind of guys where the question marks really come in of do I really want to start James Conner this week? Like I said, not a great matchup, and they're still kind of figuring things out in this offense of what's going to end up being the deal with Kyler Murray, who's going to be his favorite guys, and who is he going to rely on more? I think it's Trey McBride, and that's almost it, Brett, because there's a lot of others that I just have question marks on, and I really don't trust anybody like I trust Trey McBride. I think he's very close to a lineup lock for me, even though like people may have him as their second tight end. I'd start him with your first tight end. Like I would put him in the flex spot. I think he's worthy of that based on the volume he's gotten and the fantasy points that he's put up. It's unbelievable what he's been able to do. So lock him in to your lineup. Anybody else than that? We mentioned Connor, probably a flex play. And then Kyler, some people will ask the question. I would probably put him as a high-end quarterback too. I think that's probably the spot for him, just based on this matchup. It's in Chicago, so it's a little bit tougher than most when you're going on the road to Chicago.
I agree. Just that as far as it goes with Kyler, he's not a quarterback one by any means, but I do think that he has that higher end quarterback two value. And I agree. I don't really trust anyone. You said the magic word there, trust. I don't trust anybody except for Trey McBride this week on that odds, especially when it comes to floor versus ceiling. I don't know that the floor is very high on any of these guys except for Trey McBride and Kyler. And that's it.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you.
Yeah, and then as far as it goes with the Bears, listen, it's been kind of interesting watching Cole Kmet over the last couple of weeks here. He's probably a lower end tight end one if he plays. He was limited today in practice with a quad injury, so monitor those reports. But he is an option here. He's a streaming option. If you're just caught in a bind, if you had one of those, Mark Andrews, guy like that, and you've sort of been riding the wave here on Cole Kmet the last couple of weeks, I think he's the lower end tight end one here.
Yeah, I agree with you, and obviously kind of keep monitoring that. As for Chicago, like it's Fields more and of course then Kmet if he's playing. Like those three, I'm really just locked in on, especially the front two. And Moore, he's a low end wide receiver one right now, especially with how he's been playing with Fields. As for Justin Fields, put him in your lineup this week. He is gonna go off this week, I think, Brett. An unbelievable matchup against Arizona. He really can have a monster game. So I'm actually versing him in a couple leagues. So I'm hoping that he doesn't have a monster game, but this matchup's just too good to pass up. So definitely be starting him. And I think when you look at the running backs, there's just nobody. I don't want any of them because the big word that we talked about just a second ago with Arizona, trust. And I don't trust any one of those Chicago running backs, especially in the semifinals, to get me over the line.
And speaking of trust here, let's get to a viewer question here. Mike, half PPR, I need to sit two. Oh, another good one. Breece Hall, Jonathan Taylor, Saquon Barkley, and Jordan Addison. Zach, you're up.
Oh, boy. All right. I would see. This is one of those hard ones because if you tell anybody that you bench Saquon Barkley in the semifinal of your fantasy league, you'd look at them like they were nuts. But I'm gonna do it. I think I'm gonna do it because I like Breece Hall's matchup against Washington. I think it's one of the better matchups for fantasy running backs. And I think Jonathan Taylor also, you got to put him in your lineup because especially with Pittman's out, like they're going to be relying on JT to get them over the line. Saquon has the toughest matchup of any of these guys. He's going up against Philly in Philly on the road. against this Philly run defense, I don't know how anybody can be confident heading into that one. So yes, I just said, I don't know how you could bench Saquon, but I would bench Saquon. I think Breece Hall and JT are the two to go with.
I agree. I'm taking those two guys as well. And yeah, it's kind of nuts that you say Ben Saquon. Listen, that sort of happened this year with Jonathan Taylor falling in the drafts, the contract situation, and all that. So, you were able to scoop him up in like the 6th round, and obviously a guy like Jordan Addison picked up later in the draft as well. Listen, I'm an Addison owner, and I'm excited to play him this week. But also, I understand that there's the boom bust potential. Like his ceiling is capped because he has Justin Jefferson's there, and listen, they didn't want to rush him back from injury. He did leave the game hurt, but I don't know that he was actually that hurt. I think they're just taking their time here with it. And the last thing on Taylor, like he might not even have Zach Moss to compete with. He might just get all the carries. Zach Moss is right now hurt. He was limited in practice, and so we'll monitor the reports on that. But I think that going forward, as far as the matchup go as well, Breece Hall, Jonathan Taylor, I don't know that you can go wrong by having both of them, even in a half PPR.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you.
All right, so going into our next matchup, and we're getting to our magic word here, trust. It is Dallas at Miami. I think that there's a lot of guys here to trust, and I'm quite simply going to say from both sides, start your guys, because I think that as far as you go forward to Dallas, there hasn't really been any real disappointments. Obviously, you point to a guy like Tony Pollard over the last bulk of the weeks. I still don't know that I'm shying away from starting him. He's probably still a running back too, even with the dip. And as far as it goes in Miami, like, yes, as I just mentioned before, they're battling some injuries and stuff. I also think that as far as it goes, the injuries, they're sort of taking their time and making sure that their T's are crossed, their I's are dotted. This is going to be one of those player guys. Tyreek Hill was on the practice field today. So notable and big news there. I'm going to say start your guys across the board.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I feel like the one question mark, because of course people were kind of talking about it after last week, and it's Devon Achane. I think that's a big question mark right now for Miami because of course they went up against the Jets defense, but Raheem Mostert had a great day. He had a really good day and got all those end zone or the red zone touches and got into the end zone a couple times. Like he's locked into your lineup. Achane is kind of a question mark here because of course he has a questionable tag as well with a toe problem, but I would say you're still starting him as a low end RB2 right now this week against Dallas. There's some people who are just like pissed off and they're done with Achane. I wouldn't be one of those people. I think Achane, he'll get his touches and he'll break loose for one of those or two of those touches, and all of a sudden it's a monster week for him. So I'd still be comfortable with him as a low end RB2. And you said for the rest, I agree with you. Start your guys here.
Yeah, I would say Achane's a low to mid tier RB2. I agree. I think that the potential is for the numbers. He, even with the limited work, he still showed his explosiveness. So I'm not shying away from him, even though I do have a decision to make this weekend as far as it goes with him and Monty.
Definitely.
All right, so jumping to Sunday Night Football. It is the New England Patriots as they travel across the way to Denver to take on the Broncos. Zach, we were very iffy. We were very high on Ezekiel Elliott last week. Didn't really do much. 11 carries, 25 yards. Had 5 catches for 21 yards as well. So not great input as far as it goes for Zeke. Can you trust him again this week?
I 100% can trust Zeke this week, especially, I mean, the question marks for me as a Ramondre Stevenson owner is he going to be back? I don't think so. I think it's one more week for him. Maybe the week after they'll get him back in, or they can just hold him for the rest of the season because They're fighting for really not a lot right now. And I would say for a guy like Zeke, though, this matchup is very, very good. The arguably the best matchup. Denver and Carolina, kind of the two teams you look out for when it comes to the running game and can a guy break out. I definitely think Zeke is a RB2 this week, and he can figure things out. So I would probably put Zeke in my lineup. I would say that's probably it for guys in New England, though, Brett. I know Hunter Henry kind of had a okay week and then got the touchdown, I believe, last week against Kansas City. But I'm not a huge believer there. I think it's Zeke, and that's about it, especially if Ramondre does not play.
Yeah, and Denver's been really good against the pass. And so I think that this is going to be a game plan where they try to go to the running back as much as he can. And so, yeah, it sort of just comes down to, is Ramondre playing or is he not? If he's not, and it is Zeke's a flex consideration for me. I got burnt last week on playing him, knocked me out of my league. And so, I don't have him in any of my active leagues. But he's a flex consideration. Plain and simple. I think that the volume will be there. It's matchup. Denver has not been that great. And so, yeah, I'm taking him there.
Yeah, definitely fair, Brett.
Let's just jump to a viewer question here before we get to Denver. It is Mike again. Start one at tight end, Darren Waller, Kincaid, or Goddard?
Tough one. Tough. It's a tough one here because I feel like I'm just trying to think game script of each game here, Brett, because I feel like Philly is going to be up a lot. They'll also rely on their big guys and their run game as well to kind of get them over the line. I would say the Giants, of course, they're going to be passing a lot. So that could be an option for Waller, but you would think the Philly defense would just focus in on a guy like Waller if he's one of the only guys there. And then as for Kincaid, it was awful last week because they were relying on James Cook. I think they'll be passing more this week. So I'm going to actually say Kincaid based on I think he has the best matchup of the three against this Chargers defense that has been absolutely horrendous. And, of course, Michael Mayer got a touchdown last week, got some catches against this Chargers defense. So I'm going to go with Kincaid based on the matchup.
I agree, actually. I think all three of these guys are all neck and neck. As far as it goes with the Giants, they will throw it because I think they're going to be down in the game. That affects the Dallas Goedert value, I think, because I think they're going to be running it late, especially later in the game as they start to go up. It's going to take away, obviously, targets and throws towards Goddard. And then, yeah, like you said, like they need Kincaid to bounce back. I think it's a really good matchup for him against the Chargers. And so, yeah, I'm going to take him. But, yeah, all three of those guys are neck and neck. You can't really go wrong with any of the three because I think they're all going to finish pretty similarly.
Yeah, definitely, Brett.
All right, so then just breaking down Denver a bit here. Listen, it hasn't been great times for Denver. They get pretty much blown out by Detroit last week. Russell Wilson, 18 of 32, 223 yards and a score. I'm not sure that I'm really trusting him that much. And yes, it's a good matchup, but it's a little lower end super flex play for me just because I don't see the ceiling being that high where you probably can get seal a second quarterback.
Interesting, Brett. I actually don't think it's that great of a matchup against New England. It just their defense has kind of been the one thing that's helped them this year. The one thing that's been okay, New England. So I think from that standpoint, Russell Wilson's like mid-tier, I would say, in QB2. Of course, you're probably going to end up putting him in Superflex, but it is a difficult matchup, so I'd kind of limit expectations for a guy like Russell Wilson, and I'd kind of do the same for a guy like Courtland Sutton, who I think they're going to end up focusing in on him. He's the number one guy. He's been rolling for the Broncos recently. Didn't have a great game last week, but I still think he'll end up kind of picking things up for this Broncos team. And I would say he's a flex play for me. I would also say the same about Javonte Williams because I think he's in that flex range area. It's not a great matchup against New England, but you kind of have the floor there, which could make you feel a little bit comfortable with a guy like Javonte.
Yeah, I think the floor is there for Javonte, but I'm not sure the ceiling is there. So he's a flex option for me. Cortland Sutton's also a flex option. If I had to pick between the two, I would pick Sutton over Javonte just because I'm not sure how reliable it's been down the stretch. And again, it comes down to that word trust. Like, I'm not sure how much I trust Javonte here in these last couple of weeks, just based off of what I've seen in the previous couple of weeks.
Yeah, definitely fair.
All right, let's jump into our Monday slate here. Triple header. Let's start out in Kansas City as the Chiefs host the Raiders. Zach, let's first break down here the Chiefs. And we got Rashee Rice. Obviously, you're playing him. Plain and simple going forward. Mahomes, you're probably playing him because he's still Patrick Mahomes. It's a great matchup. Obviously, there's more of a debate than there was, but I don't know that I'm really debating it at all. I have him and Purdy, and I'm sticking with Mahomes.
It's interesting. There's one of the debates there because, of course, Mahomes just has not lived up to expectations so far this season in terms of fantasy. So I would probably I'm still riding with him in my leagues where I have him. There could be some arguments. It kind of depends who you have. Can go one way or the other. I would say Pacheco, of course, you got to put him in your lineup if he's playing and he's expected to play like we mentioned earlier. It's still a question if he's going to get that workload. But like I said, I feel comfortable with this matchup. I think that's the biggest thing about this Kansas City game. So I'm riding with Pacheco as well. And as for the wide receiver and Rashee Rice, lineup lock. He's proven that he's going to get that volume in this Kansas City offense, something that we've looked for years from a Kansas City wide receiver. Rashee Rice finally got it. So lock him in your lineup. And of course, Kelsey is of course in your lineup as well.
Yeah, I agree. I think that you're playing all those guys. I'm not really shying away from any of them. As far as it goes on the Vegas side, this is where it gets a little more interesting. And obviously, like, you're playing your Devontae Adams slot, plain and simple. I would say, though, that as far as Jacoby Myers goes, It's a little more boom or bust. Just based on the fact of, like, he hasn't been amazing. He's had his weeks where he goes off, and then he has these other weeks where he does absolutely nothing. And it's like that Gabe Davis role that we've seen here in the last stretch, whereas at the beginning of the year, it was really like every week he became this must start. It's a little more boom or bust right now. So I think I'm shying away from him this week because I think that the matchup, divisional matchup, it might be a little bit of a tougher go here.
Yeah, I mean, Devontae Adams, you're kind of just going with him. I would say a big question mark for Vegas right now is the health of Josh Jacobs. If Josh Jacobs is in, you're playing him. Josh Jacobs is out, then I don't know if I can. I would say Zamir White is probably the solid option right after that, and he actually had a really, really good game last week against the Chargers. So I'd be going with Zamir White. If Josh Jacobs is out, I would probably put him as a low end RB2. I think that's the spot for him. But because he's gonna get those touches, and I would think if they're on the goal line, it's going to Zamir White. So I feel like that's something to look out for. If Jacobs is out, I definitely would trust White as, like I said, a low end RB2.
Yeah, I agree because I think the workload's going to be there. Kansas City has like the second highest yards per carry all running backs this year, and so it's a good matchup. Plain and simple. They're not the defensive front they were last season, and so I think that if you can't go, you're playing Zamir White, another guy who's out there in a ton of leagues, potentially correct situation with Josh Jacobs. We'll get into the dynasty impact as we head into the offseason, but definitely a guy that should be added on pretty much every roster, and should be handcuffed. Obviously, if you have Josh Jacobs, you probably already scooped him up.
Yeah, definitely.
All right, so let's jump to our next matchup here. It is the New York Giants at the Philadelphia Eagles. Zach, from Philly's standpoint, I think it's pretty fair to say start your guys. I don't know that I'm really shying away from any of those guys. And then as far as it goes with the Giants, like we just said, like Saquon Barkley, it's an interesting matchup because not sure that they're going to be running the ball as much as Saquon would like. And then as far as Waller goes, it's probably a middle tier tight end one, middle to low end tight end one, I should say. Probably like that 7, 8, 9 range, and Goddard's in there as well. It's the other guys that we were mentioning before. Like he's kind of in that mix where you might have another option other than Darren Waller. 6 starts last week, 4 catches, 40 yards. Like it wasn't anything special. So there is risk. There's risk there.
Yeah, I agree with you, and I think low end tight end one's probably are in that range. He's very like even of Goddard and Kincaid. You could even put Komet in that range. Like those guys, they're just the tier below the guys who've been really really solid at tight end. So of course Saquon's an RB2. I know we talked about benching him just a little bit ago. But I mean, he's an RB2. You're starting him if you don't have like a massive question mark on him. If you don't have a better option there, definitely put him in your lineup because he is Saquon Barkley, and at any moment he could come up with a lot of fantasy points to really help you out. And as for Philly, you said it. Start your guys. Of course, Hurts and this offense kind of wanting to bounce back. So Swift as well as Brown and Smith, and then of course Goddard. So definitely start your guys there.
So let's jump to our next matchup here. It is Baltimore at San Francisco, and I'm just going to follow up by saying the exact same thing I just said. Start your guys. San Francisco, it's been pretty simple. You're going to play those guys. The one thing I will shy away from is the defense, which obviously is a standard in pretty much every single week on the lineup. As far as Baltimore and San Francisco goes, don't start the defenses this week. Look for other defenses if you haven't already. There are some pretty good streaming options out there that should be available in most leagues. If you didn't get them set up already, there should be some guys that are still out there.
Yeah, 3 of them off the top of my head: Denver, Philly, and Green Bay are 3 of them that really stand out to me this week in terms of those defenses, Brett. And you said it, start your guys. The one question mark we had was, of course, when it came to the Baltimore running game with Keaton Mitchell out. Gus Edwards is the guy, but probably shy away from him this week because of the matchup against San Fran. I think they'll rely more on guys like Zay Flowers and Isaiah Likely to get them over the line.
Yeah, and I think Likely also falls into that lower end tight end one with the bulk of those other guys. I think he's in that range too. There's a little more risk with him just because San Francisco's defense has been really good against the tight end position this year. But for the most part, you're playing all those other guys there.
Definitely.
All right, so let's head into the home stretch here with our lock of the week, our ones to watch. First with lock of the week, these are guys that are ranked outside the top 30 in consensus rankings that you should start in your flex or higher. Zach, you're up 9-6 in the standings, and a comeback season here. You can't actually catch me because there's only a couple weeks left here. But I took Josh Palmer, which clinched me the win. Obviously, huge week for Josh Palmer. The big catch there that put him ahead, 21.3 PPR points. You took Brandon Cooks, who only had 3 standard PPR points. And so I'll take the first pick here. I'm taking Ty Chandler. I think that this is going to be one of those matchups where he just gets an insane amount of volume. We obviously saw him last week, 22 carries, 132 yards, and a score. Also added 3 catches on 4 targets for 25 yards in the air. I think we're going to see some sort of similar output from him this week.
Yeah, I was gonna say people are downgrading Ty Chandler because of the matchup. I still think he's getting a ton of volume. I think it's gonna be a monster week for him because of that volume. He's this offense is kind of running through him, so that's huge for me, Brett. For lock of the week, I'm going with Tyler Lockett. So lock him in. I do think it's a great matchup against Tennessee and kind of taking advantage of that secondary. So behind DK Metcalf, they're going to have Geno Smith back this week. Tyler Lockett, I think he's in for a monster game, and the deep threat that he brings, I think it'll be huge for Seattle this week.
Yeah, I agree. I think that Lockett's going to be pretty good this week. Just last thing on Ty Chandler, it sort of reminds me of when we had that Kyron Williams and Cam Akers down stretch of last year, and it was like you started to see the shift a little bit here, and then they were like, wait a minute, Kyron Williams is good at football. Let's just give him the ball. We're seeing that now with Ty Chandler. The light bulb went off, and they're like, okay, let's feed this guy. So yeah, the work's there for him, and that's why I took him this week. Let's head to ones to watch. These are guys who are owned in less than 50% of leagues and guys that we think could be added or scooped up next week. Obviously, next week is the championship week for most leagues, and so it's a little bit more of an interesting case here. Last week, I obviously took Josh Palmer in that one as well, taking the 2-for-1 on Josh Palmer, 21.3 standard PPR points. Zach, you had a pretty good pick in Chase Brown, who had 8.1 PPR points. This week, I'm going back to the well. It's a guy that I've taken quite a few times here on ones to watch, but it seems that the people just aren't listening because still there in 55% or 56% of leagues, it's Josh Downs. Really just head to the injury concern for Michael Pittman, the injury concern for a guy like Zach Moss, and it's really like, okay, they have to feed Jonathan Taylor, but then who do they throw the ball to? Pittman dealing with a concussion right now. Even if he does play, I'm not sure that they're going to run him out there at 100% because he's coming off a concussion. That means more targets for a guy who has been so reliable for Gardner Minshew. And early in the season when Gardner Minshew first came in, what was happening? It was like double digits every single week in fantasy. I think it's a pretty good two matchups here. They play the Falcons, and then next week they play the Raiders. Two good matchups. I think that's I would want in my lineup with the high floor, Josh Downs.
Definitely fair, Brett. Yeah, and especially with Pittman's injury kind of on the radar and lingering around, like it could be a really solid option in Josh Downs this week. For me, I'm looking for ones to watch. It's an interesting one because obviously we're at the home stretch here, the last couple of weeks. I think this matchup this week is great for a guy in Wan'Dale Robinson who can end up getting a lot of targets from Tommy DeVito. He's been okay, and he's not just on the flex radar just yet. But I feel like a game like this against this Philly defense, who's been weak to say the least so far this season, can definitely get a guy like Wan'Dale Robinson a lot of fantasy points. A couple of weeks ago, it was 6 receptions for 79 yards against the Packers. So Tommy DeVito was looking for him. It was a bit of a struggle last week, but that was the entire offense as well. Only had 4 for 25. So he's getting those targets. I think that's big in an offense where there's not many guys. So I definitely think in a matchup where they'll be down, he'll be looking for a guy like Wan'Dale Robinson, Tommy DeVito, that is.
Yeah, and Wan'Dale Robinson's only rostered in 6.5% of leagues. And so it's a guy who's out there in the bulk of leagues. Next week, they get the Rams as well. So another game where they could be throwing, and both sides could be throwing in that game. I think that I agree with it. Wan'Dale Robinson definitely a good target. He's out there in our league, and I'm sort of debating between myself, can I go out there and grab him, or should I go out there and grab him? And those debates will continue over the next little while here till another team goes out and scoops them up, and then I have a decision for me.
There you go. Definitely.
All right, so that'll do it for this week, Zach. We head into what will be a heated week here in our semifinal matchup in our redraft league. You and I going at it. I'm in the semifinals here in our dynasty as well, so should be kind of interesting here. And my fingers and toes are crossed here for this weekend. Any last words here before we sign off?
I'm looking at tonight, Brett, Alvin Kamara and Chris Olave, my two guys that I'm looking for, and spread out in a couple of my leagues. Those are my two. I'm hoping for some big games from those two guys.
Yeah, and I'm looking for a big game here out of Puka Nacua, a guy that I've been touting pretty much the entire season. It means no worries, but I'm not gonna lie, I'm a little worried heading into tonight. Just the stress is it is definitely out there.
Yeah, definitely. But happy holidays to our viewers. Of course, next week it'll be past Christmas time. So Merry Christmas to those who celebrate.
Yes, to Merry Christmas to all, and to all a good night. Please subscribe to us on YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. The night is darkest before the dawn. We shall rise yet again. We will catch you next week with our recap of Week 16 and a championship match preview here on the Third Round Reversal Fantasy Football Podcast. For Zach Malamutt, I'm Brett Malamutt. Merry Christmas, everyone. We will catch you next week.